Welcome to Shelving Cart. I'm Sarah,
And I'm Teddy.
and we're both librarians here to have a podcast book club with each other and all of you. On Shelving Cart, we talk about books like it's a 1 hour book club meeting. So we talk about likes, dislikes, reviews, general feelings, and more.
And generally completely spoil the book, so be warned.
Yes, and today we will be discussing Camp Zero by Michelle Min Sterling.
Woohoo!
So, Teddy, you suggested this book for the podcast. How did you hear about it? Because it is Michelle Min Sterling's first book that she wrote.
Totally. So this has been on my TBR for a long time because another librarian friend of ours, Becca, who we went to grad school with, got an ARC, an advanced reader's copy of it, and gave it like a 4-star review, but I couldn't understand why it wasn't a 5-star review. I was like, okay. I think that you're just being stingy with the stars. And so I put it on my TBR, but didn't get an advanced reader copy of it, even though I tried. And then I've been like waiting for it to come out. I think when I pitched it, it wasn't even out yet.
No.
And then it came out and I cataloged it and felt very secure in my decision. Like, I'm not going to lie, cataloging books is a great way to expand your TBR list because you're like, ooh, this looks pretty good. Like, that's how I find most of the books that I want to read these days is like cataloging them.
Our cataloger at work, when he's like wrapping the books in plastic, his desk is on the way to the water cooler for me to fill up my water bottle. And I always see like flashes of books and I'm like, ooh, that looks really good.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but
Covering books. Yeah.
it's the librarian privilege because when you suggested this book, I went and saw if we had it or whatever, and the cataloger also like buys the fiction books, so I
Yeah.
went and saw that he had placed it on order, so I got to be like, hey, Paul, can you pull that aside for me as soon as it comes in? So I got it first.
Yes.
That is librarian privilege.
It is.
Okay, so I have some background on Michelle Min Sterling. Admittedly, it's not a lot. She she doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. I think it's
Yeah.
just because she's so new to being onto the writing scene, or like the published scene, I guess I would say. So here's what I have. Very quick bio of Michelle Min Sterling is that she was born in British Columbia, Canada. However, right now she resides in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So shout out to a Massachusetts icon. She is a professor at Berklee College of Music, where she teaches literature and creative writing. I watched an interview with her, and she did note that a lot of the classes that one of the classes that she teaches is a class focusing on dystopian/utopian literature. So that makes a lot of sense for the content we have today.
Yes.
She's the so I watched an interview with her on Good Morning America because book is a Read with Jenna book too. It was selected in one of the Good Morning America book clubs. And she said she wrote Camp Zero because she wanted to write a call to action on the climate crisis and show what happens through collectivism and collective action. And then she also said in that same interview, as a fun fact, there was an all black women book club there also interviewing her as part of this Good Morning America interview. And so one of the questions was like, who would you want to play in a movie or show adaptation, the characters? And she said she would mostly want to cast new people, but she did say she would love to have Nicolas Cage play Mayor, which just brought me a lot of joy.
That's so funny.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I got on her. She honestly, there's not a whole lot out there. All of her bios, like on Berkeley or on her website, are just like she was born in Canada and she lives in Massachusetts and she works at Berkeley.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. It's
Yeah.
wild that this is her debut novel and it's like blowing up so fucking hard. Like, this
Yeah.
is a popular book. The hold list on it at the library is long, you know?
It brings me brings me to kind of to an interesting factoid is that I was looking at the Goodreads reviews And this is kind of rated low on Goodreads. I don't know if you've looked at all, and it's very confusing to me. I think it might be, well, I don't know. I think it might be just people expecting one thing from like sci-fi fantasy and not getting it. Um so it has a 3.23 average on
What
Goodreads.
the
Yeah,
fuck? What
yeah.
the fuck?
3 stars is the most common. Yeah. I know.
That's heinous. What the fuck?
But so here I pulled out two-star ones and one 5-star ones. Burn Loves Books wrote a 2-star review. There were definitely some things I enjoyed, parentheses White Alice, the sex workers, but after the slow build, it feels like the book just kind of ends. I honestly don't know that I truly got this book at all. Have you ever felt that way after reading a book? Sadly, I don't think this one was for me, but I know many people have enjoyed it. Have you read it? Thoughts? And then Andrea gave a 2.5-star review and said 2.5 stars. Not sure that I really understand the point. It was interesting, but didn't work for me on a lot of levels. Too much left undiscussed / unexplored. And then
My God.
I know. And then Bethany, 5-star review, or 5-star review from Bethany said, I don't know why Goodreads hates this book. I thought it was so well done. I read a ton of books every year. I read a ton of books every year, and I have no problems quitting anything that starts off lame. I don't want to discount the powerful message, but I was so excited to bring this book to the beach and read it. Give it a shot. So just shout out to Bethany.
Yeah,
She's
Bethany
like, what
fucking gets it.
What the fuck?
Right. What the fuck are you all talking about? No, that's bunk. That just can't be right.
You know what? I think that this book is like, my thinking is that it's just over 300 pages or just under 300 pages long. And so because of that, it's like, might seem like it might be like an easy read, but I don't think it is. Like, I think it's kind of more in a similar vein to like Born, where you might need to talk about it quite a bit with somebody before it really like settles in to you, or like have a discussion, because the writing is very clear. It's very plain, like quote unquote plain writing, but it's like there's a lot going on. So I think it just is lacking some of that like a literary look into it, if you know what I mean.
I kind of feel like what might be doing it in is that it got sold to the wrong audience.
Yeah.
Like, it's a popular book in that it was made a book club with Read with Jenna book or whatever the fuck. Like, and so there are people, like, I have patrons all the time whose, like, entire TBR is just book club, Read with Jenna picks, Good Morning America, Oprah, like, they just read. People love being told what to read.
Yeah.
I'm no exception, but it's true. And there's like a whole culture of people who get their TBR list from these book clubs. And I think that this was like kind of an interesting choice for Read with Jenna.
Yeah.
Because like I know like the kinds of books that are on that list, it's not that they're not smart books. They are. And a lot of times they're like very like good literary choices. Like it's not that I think that those lists are like junky books. It's not that I think that this book is like too smart for those people. It's that I think that it doesn't fit the mold of what those book clubs usually pitch.
Yeah.
In that it is speculative fiction about a sex worker bringing down anarchy style, bringing down libertarian capitalists.
Yeah.
And like I don't think anyone is like I just don't think that's the typical vibe for those book clubs.
That's why I feel like a book discussion may assist with the dislikes of the book. You know, last week or last 2 weeks ago when we talked about Born, I went back and changed my review to 4 stars instead of 3 stars. You know, it's like you get more out of a discussion. So I think this book might be part of that. So I think all of the people that maybe read it, who was maybe the intended audience, if they had like a conversation about it with somebody else who had read it, that may change things, perhaps.
And I think, your copy, you read the hardcover, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I read the ebook, and so mine came with discussion questions and an interview with Michelle Min Sterling, and I know yours didn't. I think that was a smart move to include because it sort of like gently guides you towards the point of the book. Like, I think if people happen to read those, like I read them because I wanted to be prepared for our discussion, but like I think that would help the first guy who was like, I don't know if I fucking got it. It's like read the questions, see where they're leading you, and then maybe like have a self discussion.
Yeah.
Have a little convo with yourself.
I also think like I have been known very much to read a book, close it, and then pick up another book and read it and close it and pick up another book and read it and close it and so on and so on. And so I think if you're not in the mode to have like a critical discussion or thoughts about the book that you're reading, then this might not be the book for you either. Which is
Valid.
also completely fine.
Literally, reading books that are for thinking about is not a morally good activity.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
morally neutral.
Agreed.
But this
agreed.
just happens to fall in that category.
Yes. Okay. All right. So, let's read the book jacket. I got my copy so we can do our ASMR opening the book.
Gorgeous. Incredible.
Okay. So, in remote northern Canada, a team led by a visionary American architect is breaking ground on a building project called Camp Zero, intended to be the beginning of a new way of life. A clever and determined young woman, code-named Rose, is offered a chance to join the Blooms, a group hired to entertain the men in the camp, but her real mission is to secretly monitor the mercurial architect in charge. In return, she'll receive a home for her climate-displaced Korean immigrant mother and herself. Rose quickly secures the trust of her target, only to discover that everyone has a hidden agenda and nothing is as it seems. Through skillfully braided perspectives, including those of a young professor longing to escape his wealthy family and an all-woman military research unit struggling for survival at a climate station, the fate of Camp Zero's inhabitants reaches a stunning crescendo. Atmospheric, fiercely original, and utterly gripping, Camp Zero is an electrifying page-turner and a masterful exploration of who and what will survive in a warming world and how falling in love and building community can be the most daring acts of all.
Okay. We're getting a
Yeah.
little into like love will save us from capitalism, which we have both agreed is not. But I think that's book jacket marketing. I don't
Yeah.
think that's real.
I mean, it's a little bit part of the book.
Oh no. We'll discuss.
We'll discuss. I honestly, I pretty much think that that's a theme in any climate fiction sci-fi book. Like pretty much always is in there. Not that that's a bad thing. Human connection is a huge part of it. It's just more nuanced than love saves us against capitalism. It's just saying that those things are good.
Yeah,
Love
that's
is
fine.
good.
Love is okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, this was also mentioned in a Goodreads review that I did not read here, but one of the Publisher's Weekly blurb on this is a stunning debut. This should earn a place on shelves alongside Station 11 and Annihilation, which I saw a lot of the 2 and 3-star reviews. Not a lot, but a couple reference that exact review.
Yeah.
And they were mad because they were like, I don't like it when like a reviewer references other books because it sets up the expectations too much for like a specific thing. Yeah. So that was somebody's complaint, was about that exact review.
I think that's a bad take, but I do think that comparing this to Station 11 is like very smart and good.
All right, Teddy, will you lead us off with a plot overview?
Yes, I tried my best to make it as short as I could. It's still fucking long. A lot happens in 300 pages in this book, but let's get into it. Okay, so Camp Zero is set in the near-ish future in a world where climate change has made its mark clear and techno-libertarianism is gaining a strong foothold. Rose, as she is called for most of the novel, is a Korean-American woman who, after being raised on Cape Cod, becomes a sex worker in the Floating City, a literal offshore city for wealthy capitalists trying to escape the climate crisis. While working there, she becomes a paid companion to Damien Mitchell, the wealthy inventor of the Flick, which is a chip implant given to every child at birth that allows internet access at all times. Damien offers Rose a job, the payment for which will be a life for her and her mother in the Floating City. She must go to the far north with a group of other sex workers. There she will act as a mole, appeasing an architect named Mayer, who thinks he is building a safe haven for community in Alaska, complete with a university. In reality, Mare's community is a front for Damien's mining of rare minerals needed for Flicks, but Rose must keep him from knowing this. Meanwhile, Rose falls for a worker in the construction site of camp known only as the Barber. The book has multiple characters to follow, and so we also meet Grant, a young man who comes from money and is running from his family's privilege after leaving his girlfriend to die in a climate disaster. More on that later.
Boo.
Grant. Grant comes to Mare's project thinking that he will be a professor, but instead finds himself trying to teach an unwilling and gruff group of construction workers. Meanwhile, not far by Snowmobile, a government research post called White Alice has been populated entirely by women charged by the US government to monitor climate change in the area. The women have been left to their own devices after a while and, in their last meeting with government supervisors, managed to pull off a plan to get one of the women pregnant. They now survive as a family with a baby on their own in the wilderness, sometimes venturing into nearby towns and murdering men for necessities. Go off, White Alice. They have adopted one man into their group known as Genesis so that there can be a new generation after their daughter, Aurora. These 3 points of view converge at the end of the book when it becomes clear that White Alice has infiltrated Mare's project, with one White Alice woman, Sal, posing as a madam, their daughter Aurora posing as a sex worker, and Genesis posing as the Barber. Dun dun dun. They plan to violently stop the construction project and rope in Grant and Rose, whose real name has been revealed at this point as Nari, after they all literally blow up Myers Camp and kill the executives involved. Grant leaves to become part of White Alice, while Aurora and Nari head south to the continental United States. So, yeah, just a fuck ton happens, and that is like the most bare bones plot overview that I could possibly give. People die, people fuck, there's like a lot of throwing men's bodies in ice holes. It's
a whole
great
thing. It was great.
Thanks.
Yes. No, that was very succinct in my opinion. So, great job, because you wrote that by yourself, which I normally do not do.
I had the help of a couple of very over-explanatory reviews on the internet, which is always good.
Okay, so quick rundown, a little bit more into our characters. We're going to speed run this. I grouped them by location because I think that makes the most sense, because then you get kind of senses of like what's going on in the story. So starting off with Camp Zero. Camp Zero is the Canadian camp by architect Mayer, and it's supposed to be a future campus in his mind, but really Mayer is like colonizing Canada / they're mining the minerals for Damien's Flicks. So that's Camp Zero, and that is where we have a group of sex workers known as the Blooms, where Rose, our main character, one of our main characters / Nari, as we realize her name is later, is working. There's a whole group of Blooms, but the most important one to note, and so Blooms are all the sex workers, and they've all been given flower names, and that's why they're called the Blooms. And that is where she works with Willow. So Willow is the other most important Bloom, because she is actually the daughter of White Alice, Aurora, posing as a sex worker to infiltrate Camp Zero. Which brings us to Judith, who is the madam, who is also Sal from White Alice, also infiltrating Camp Zero. Remember, Rose is also infiltrating Camp Zero for Damien to keep Mayor happy.
So that's 3 out of 7, right?
Yeah.
Or 3 out of 8, rather, if you include Judith, right?
Yes, exactly. Okay, so then also at Camp Zero we get Mayer, who is the architect who used to be in his young idealistic years a like anarchist, kind of anti-capitalist situation, but as time has gone on he's become a full-on libertarian asshole. And then we have the foreman, who is also one of Damien's moles. So he is working at the camp that's drilling. He's a bad dude. He's a bad guy. He gets murdered, thank God. Then we have the barber, who is also infiltrating from White Alice, because he is Genesis, who they basically picked to breed with Willow. But the barber and our friend Rose / Nari fall in love. And so that kind of causes issues with Willow and the barber. And then we get Grant. And Grant is a full-on fucking piece of shit asshole.
Yeah. I gotta say, I want to interject quickly to say that, like, in the book discussion for this, Michelle Min Sterling was like, I really tried to find that balance with Grant between, like, having you, like, hate his flaws and make him sympathetic at the same time. He's not sympathetic. Fuck Grant.
I I felt like maybe 5% bad for him, like at the beginning. You know, going through the story, I
Yeah.
was like, listen, at least he's thinking critically, but he just needs to like kill his dad. Like, I don't know
Right.
what to say,
Yeah.
you know? Like, fucking get over it. Like, people
Y-
disagree with their parents all the time, you know? So,
But, like,
Grant,
yeah.
yeah. So Grant is a rich kid. He is a rich kid who goes to in the universe. It's called Walden. Like
It's Harvard.
university. It's Harvard. It's Harvard. He goes to Harvard, Walden. And when he's having a little bit of a rebellious phase with his parents, he meets a woman, named Jane, who he abandons in the middle of a fucking hurricane to die.
Moment of
I,
silence for Jane. Like,
I,
oh,
Oof. And then his whole character after that is just using Jane for character development.
it's
It's
awful.
like it's awful. It's just so awful. So
So,
Grant is at in current times he is at Camp Zero because he thinks he's going to be a teacher at the school, but there's no school.
right. I
Yeah.
do want to clarify for our listeners briefly. I know I'm ruining your speed run. Is just that, like, Sarah and I went to the beach together last weekend, and I had already finished Camp Zero. We were doing an okay job of not talking about it, but we were all reading before bedtime. We were all sharing a room, and Sarah puts her book down and turns to her boyfriend and goes, "You would never leave me in the middle of a hurricane, right?" The boyfriend's like, "No." And I turn to Win and I'm like, "You would never leave me in a hurricane, right?" Like, it's just so absurd. Like, this
Yeah.
is like one of the jaw drop moments
Yeah.
because you don't figure it out until, like, late game that that's what he did and why he's feeling so shitty about
And
Jane.
then yeah. Yep. He sucks. He sucks. So those are our Camp Zero characters. Then we get White Alice, which is a radar station in Canada, but it is staffed by American soldiers. But that's kind of like the cover story of the situation. The American soldiers are actually getting abandoned there to see if they can survive in the winter, or like survive up there and what the community that they create. So there we have this one's told in second person, and it uses the collective we, which is great.
Hot.
Yeah,
Yes.
and who we have at White Zero. I mean, oh my God, at White Alice is a botanist, a biologist, a cartographer, a meteorologist, a programmer, and a security specialist, all women. And then we also have Sal, who is their sergeant, who she is kind of like keeping them all in shape and like giving the quote unquote orders. And then we also have Genesis, who's the barber, who's also there, and then we have Aurora, the baby, who was born during their escape, like their not escape, but starting a new generation of White Alice. And then we have our next location is the floating city / Boston. Because the floating city is offshore of Boston, and that's where Rose and her mother live. They live kind of like on the north shore of Massachusetts. I was imagining it like Nahant or something like that. If
I
you're,
think I said Cape Cod, but I think you're right.
yeah, I think it's the
probably-
north shore. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Whatever.
So so Rose and her mother live there, and then we also have the floating city. In the floating city, we have Damien, and Damien, as Teddy mentioned in the outline, is the creator of the Flick, which is just the social media feed that's like injected into your body at birth. And Rose is a sex worker for Damien in the floating city, and that's who she's spying for at Camp Zero. The floating city / Boston stuff is all flashbacks in the timeline. And then we get Grant is also there because that's where he does horrible things to Jane, and that is where Jane is because she was working at catering an event at Walden, which is where Grant met
Yeah.
her. And then they fell in love. And then there was a hurricane, and his parents picked him up in a fucking helicopter. And they're like, we'll go back for her. I promise. There's no time right now, but we'll go get her. She'll be fine. And she's dead. She's dead. She's dead. And she writes a letter to him. And in the letter, she writes, I'm growing used to the way I sound when I cry in the dark.
Brutal.
It's fucked up. Okay, those are our characters. That was not a speed run, but it's okay because we're just talking about it. So we did not bury the lead on this one, but did you like it?
I
Why?
fucking loved this book. I loved this book. I think it was smart, speculative fiction. There were so many characters to love and just the right number to hate. The world was really good. It got a little complicated with the number of moles. But I loved it. Like, I just had fun all the way. There was a little bit of like collective imagination stuff that I found really intriguing and exciting. Like, I think this book just had a lot of smart shit to say, and I was really here for it. Like, I just loved the shit out of it. I
Yeah.
gave it an easy 5 on
Yeah.
Goodreads, for sure.
Yeah, I would say that I really enjoyed it too, and that what I liked about it is that it is a 300 pages. It's a tight story. Like, there's not a sentence that is wasted in the book. So not that it's not a complex book, because of course it is, but the writing style, how it is written to make all of that make sense in 300 pages, it has to be very like clean writing style, which I really like. That is a personal favorite of mine, is kind of a more minimalist writing style, which I think this isn't super minimalist, but it has it because otherwise this book could have been easily like 500 pages long. I'm sure that there were drafts of this story that were
Yep.
500 pages long, but shout out to Michelle Sterling and her editor for getting it to like this, because I think that the way it is very impactful. It's bing bing bing, but in a good way.
Yes.
In like
Yes.
in a perfect way.
Let it be known that Bing 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 can also be so positive.
Yeah.
Sometimes we love Bing Bing Bing.
I mean, like, Ursula K. Le Guin is bing 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 all the time, you know? Like, because she's just like, let me just stab you in the heart with this line in this book.
Unless you're reading Left Hand of Darkness, which has never said bing once.
There's not even a single bing in there. That's true. But that is true. However, still great. But I think what's great about this is that there are so many lines in this book that it's like, I think some people might interpret it as being like too on the nose or like over the top or like, you know, whatever. But I think it's just sentences like Michelle Sterling is being like, this is what I believe via my characters, you know?
Yeah. No,
And
valid.
I respect the hell out of a book that has no holds barred, just like, this is absolutely what this book is about. And so I really like that in this book.
I think that takes bravery, too.
Yes.
To
And
do
it's hard to get a book published like that.
Yes.
Especially
Agree.
a book that's like, I don't like men this much. As this book is like,
Oh my
men
God.
are bad.
In my draft of the notes, I have like notes on all the characters because I didn't realize. Okay, so like we decided to do a speed run of the characters because we were like, we have so much shit to talk about in the back half that like we can't spend so much time talking about everybody. But one of the characters I have in my own notes is men (parentheses) as an idea.
Awful. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I know. Okay, well, who was your favorite character?
Okay. So this is a trick, right? Like I loved Nari a lot, which I think is like, it's also kind of hard to write a book where your main character is people's favorite character. And I would argue that Nari is like definitely of the main characters, the mainest.
Yeah.
So, and what I really liked about her character arc was that it was an arc away from escapism in a really satisfying way. Like Damien offers her this job and says, you know, I'll set you up in an apartment with your mom in the floating city. And he says, you'll be the first to see the sunrise and you'll never have to think about the mainland again. And that's why she takes this job. And over the course of the book, as she like becomes more inveigled with the people around her, as she falls in love with Genesis, whose real name we never learn, by the way, she starts to like sort of slip away from escapism. And at the end of the book, she sort of rides into the sunset towards all her problems with Aurora. And I thought that that was a really powerful movement of a character. And so I'm tempted to say that. But my real favorite character was just all of White Alice. I want to move in with them. These are my women. I understand each and every one of them. You know, White Alice, because it's written in the collective we, I think we can call safely one character. And I loved them. They literally murder men for gas and oil. And
money.
they become and money. And they become like a sort of like local legend, which I love. And like the Blooms find writing in the dressing room in one of the they were like set up in a mall, and one of the dressing rooms has writing in it that says White Alice is here, not White Alice was here. White Alice is here. And like I just love my spooky ladies, you know. I'm kind of obsessed with them. What about you, Sarah?
Well,
Favorite?
I want to say that description of Rose's arc is very literary, and I really appreciate that because I feel like I passively enjoyed that, but until you said it, I did not like actively appreciate that exact arc. So thank you for that nugget. But my favorite character is also White Alice. Little side fun story real quick is that when I was in high school, my freshman year of high school, this is an embarrassing story about me.
I'm ready. Let's
My
go.
freshman year of high school, my high school English teacher my freshman year of high school English teacher who I loved, and I still very much like the times that we had in high school were great. He was like, "Hey, you should read this book. I think you'd like it." And I was like, "Okay, what is it?" And he was like, "It's Anthem by Ayn Rand." I know, which I had no political like attachment. I didn't know anything about Ayn Rand then, which is why it's embarrassing for me. I mean, I was 14, but I didn't know anything about anything to do with that, right? So I don't know if you know the conceit of Anthem at all, but I read that book in like literally a night. I took it home and I read it. I know.
This
And
is hurting me.
I know,
Yeah.
me too, thinking about it. And it's a story about how a collective, it's told in we, like the whole time, and then somebody breaks off from the collective to like save their, I don't know, like save their settlement or whatever, and breaks off into an I, and then it comes first person to save it. So it's like literally kind of the opposite of this book, like the complete opposite. But when I read this book, like, not to say that my politics are inherent to who I am, like, having always known that, but when I read that book, I was like, I really liked the we parts at the beginning. And I didn't, because I came back in and I was like, oh, I read this book in one night. I liked it. I liked the beginning, but I didn't really like the end, you know, without knowing anything about Ayn Rand, anything, which is also hilarious now to be like, oh, I've read a book by Ayn Rand. That is the shortest one she's written. So, you know.
Yes. Anthem, if you're going to read any Ayn Rand,
Yeah.
read Anthem. I read The Fountainhead when I was 13 to be a rebellious little shit. I know. And my dad, I specifically remember being like, look, Dad, I'm reading The Fountainhead. And I remember him being like, it's good that you're trying to expand your political views. And I was like, what? I like didn't know what I was reading.
So
I do, yeah. I think it's very fair to be like, White Alice is Michelle Min Sterling's answer to Anthem. I think that's a very smart take.
Yeah, I mean, really, I was like, oh yeah, I've done this before. I loved White Alice, but Anthem is a trash book. Let's not get
Yeah.
it wrong. And my least favorite character is Grant. He can go die in a fucking hole.
Yeah, Grant was definitely the shittiest person. I would say, like, by a long shot, far and away.
I think after I found out that he literally de facto murdered his girlfriend, like that I was like, anytime he came back up on the page, I just in my head was thinking, shut the fuck up. Like
Right.
I don't care about you anymore. How could I ever care about you? Like,
I've lost all respect for you. Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
absolutely.
seriously. I'm like, oh my god, she literally died in the bathtub. She had to shit in a pot. That's in the book. She shit in a pot while he was away.
And while he was away, to clarify, he got like whisked away to his parents' house in the floating city. So he was like perfectly fine. And then, of course, when he finds out that she died, he like throws some shit and is like really pissy. But it's like, don't get in the fucking helicopter without her then. Like, go back and get her. I
If
just
you
don't understand.
He already didn't like his parents then, and if he already didn't like them, he shouldn't have trusted them. But he's like, but I love my dad. I can't say no to him. Grow up.
Gross.
Grow
Yeah.
up. Grow
Stop
up.
being a fucking man baby. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sarah has a lot of feelings.
I just disgusted me in a way that I can't. It's like one of the most deplorable things. I saw one of the Goodreads reviews that was like, this is a little too man hating, and I was like, even if you don't want to do a general I hate men situation, the man in this book, pretty much all of the men in this book are trash. Like, even if just looking at the book, those ones are horrible. Like, how, whatever.
Uh, could I just go ahead and say that men as the idea
Yeah.
are my least favorite character? Like, I think, okay, Grant sucks. The foreman, who is Damien's mole, also sucks. He gets a satisfying dispatchment in that he tries to force himself on Nari, and then Sal as Judith fucking slits his throat.
Yeah. And then they stick him
Like
in an
a-
ice fishing hole.
Literally the baddest bitches alive. Take care of that for
Because
us.
that's the ice fishing hole is their murder drop off point
Yes.
in the
yes.
book.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I think like this is the quote that I set aside for men as an idea that like I think really gets to why I like am joining the man hating train, because like let's be real, y'all have met men. Like here's what it is. The prophesizing about how and what, and most importantly, who will survive was a common topic among Rose's clients in the floating city. They often discussed how they plan to hold on to their wealth in periods of crisis: offshore banks, offshore cities, temperamental government bonds cashed into gold, divestment of all fossil fuels into clean energy portfolios with a healthy percentage devoted to data surveillance and cybernetics research. And that for me is like such a perfect thing, like a perfect analysis of like what is wrong with the protect yourself mentality that all of the men in this book have.
Yeah.
That it's like they will do anything to remain as wealthy and privileged as they have been. The exception to this, of course, is Genesis / the barber, but it's because he doesn't have any upward mobility. Like, this is also a book about hating rich people as much as it is about hating men. But someone in the book, and I forgot to attribute it, it's either Sal or Nari, and I love that their voices are similar, says, "Why do men take so easily whatever they want? Because nothing will ever be enough. The more a man possesses, the more he thinks he deserves."
Yep. I think that was Nari.
Apt. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. I think I highlighted that quote too somewhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I also think it's like you cannot. think this is a theme that Ursula K. Le Guin brings up in her books very commonly too, is that you cannot separate man from capitalism. Like capital M man. And
Mm-hmm.
not to say women are not part of the problem in capitalism. Of course they are. Like glass ceilings, all of that bullshit. All of that bullshit is part of capitalism, right? Like all of that. But I think kind of what is posed is like men did it first. Like men caused these problems,
Mm-hmm. The
And
driving forces. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Which does kind of bring me a little bit to the only things I have two things that I'm like a little bit hesitant about in this book.
Mm.
And that's like I'm definitely in the 5-star range for this book, but is that there's like a couple little dislikes that I had, and I one of the Goodreads reviews did bring this up, which I did agree with. Is that there's no like indigenous perspectives in this book, no indigenous perspectives, and then Nari is not a white woman, but there's also like no discussion on like it's like very gender based uh like analysis in the book, so there's not a lot of race based analysis, like not a lot of intersections on like race. There is some discussion of like Nari being half white, half Korean, but it's not really discussed in like a greater sense, which is the only thing that I think maybe could have been lacking, especially because a lot of it has to do with like land in the
Mm-hmm.
book, so I think indigenous culture could have been a part of this book too.
I think, okay, I have a couple responses to that. I think, in terms of like indigenous perspectives in speculative fiction about climate change, like, I think it's just unfair to ask an Asian American woman to write that book.
No,
Um,
yeah,
you
definitely
know
can
what I
see that.
mean? Like,
Yeah,
I hesitate to be like, oh, this perspective is not what we need to tell this story. I think that would be a sick ass book, and I would absolutely read it if somebody like wrote an indigenous perspective on this. But I just don't think it's necessarily fair to ask Sterling to do that.
I
I
guess
think
not.
she, yeah.
I guess not a perspective, like not a POV character. More what I mean
Mm.
is like a discussion of that in the book, like
I
of
think there
in.
are, right. I think there are a few moments where
Yes.
like indigenous cultures are referenced in terms of like the power that they have, lose, regain, maintain in regards to like land in the north.
Yes.
And so you get this understanding that there's like a separate-ish battle going on about land stewardship that
Yeah.
like is not the focus of this book but is happening in the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
And so that was like I get that. Like, do I wish that that was like maybe more entwined? Like, yes. Do I understand why it wasn't? Also, yes.
Yeah.
I think in terms of Nari being half white, half Korean, there was a good line about it in I wrote this down in my notes about the floating city that Nari says back in the floating city, ethnicity was a ready-made brand. In that like her identity as an a Korean American woman like was sort of like funneled into her sex work in a way that like glazed over her like actual identity and like instead became like about
Yeah.
fetishization. And I also think we get that when we're talking about how her parents met, which is that her dad was in Korea and like basically like chose Nari's mother and just brought her back
Yeah.
to the States with like no social network or support. And like there's all this stuff about naming Nari and like how her mother had to like sort of fight the in-laws to be able to name her something Korean and like so I think that there's stuff in
Yes.
there. Like I guess I don't know. I hesitate. Like obviously as a white person. Like, I can't say like whether it's good
Yeah.
enough. I do want to call out its presence.
No,
Like it was
it's
there.
definitely there. I think it's definitely shown to how Nari's more of a commodity as a half Korean, half American woman, as a mixed race Asian woman.
Yeah.
Like that, I think is definitely in the book. I think it's more of like the general like political analysis of the book. You know,
Yeah.
it's definitely a focus on the heavy like class is the greatest intersection, which is
Right.
something that I do agree with. So, but there are things that it's more in depth than that. There's more to it than that, and it has such like a beautifully diverse crop of characters that every once in a while, like it feels like a little quote unquote colorblind. You know, just a little bit. But I don't think, like you
Interesting.
said, I'm also white, so it's not like I have the capacity to say whether it's good enough or not. You know?
Yeah,
Yes, and I
totally.
do generally think like a class-based analysis is like the thing that will free us all, basically. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. Right. And it seems like Michelle is on the same
yes,
page
I
as
think
you.
so.
Right.
I think so.
Yeah.
But this one's not necessarily a dislike, but it's more of a confusion that hopefully through discussion you can help me see. But what do you think that Sterling was saying at the end about White Alice with Nari and White Alice and how like Nari has the discussions with Aurora when they're leaving is like you don't have to kill people. You don't have to do that. You don't have to murder and like the White Alice like ethos is only take a life when it's absolutely necessary. Love your family more than yourself. Be reverent of your environment. The sacrifice of one is worth the continuation of many, and leave something behind for the future generation. Like I'm not sure how Michelle Minsterling feels about White Alice in this book. In the interview I watched with her, somebody asked, was like, where would you want to live? And she said White Alice herself.
Right.
So
Right.
that's like my only lingering questions a little bit are the kind of the ending points. I think it maybe have to do with what you said earlier, where you were like, Nari goes from like looking away from her problems and escaping her problems to going and facing them head on. So she can't just go join White Alice because of her mother, but she seems to have like a couple moral issues, aka the murdering with White
Right.
Alice.
AKA the ice holes. Yeah.
Yeah,
I hear you. And I think, okay, so first of all, I think that Michelle Minsterling loves White Alice
yeah,
because also in the reader's guide, the reading group guide, she says that writing the collective voice of White Alice came very easily, which is like very darling. Um, I also want to pull this quote where she says, I wanted to explore how agency and self protection are experienced for women in Camp Zero and how they forget their own sense of accountability and justice in a world that is squared against them. And so I think while that list of like things from like White Alice literally has like their commandments,
yeah,
and while the White Alice commandments are like mostly really good, they're also in a sense their own kind of floating city. Like it's less shitty and they all certainly take care of each other, but it's also very isolationist.
yeah,
It's very like we will survive by being apart from the world. And I think that in a rejection of that, Aurora and Nari, who both had the option to go with White Alice and sort of like live in this like women's utopia essentially where they keep around the breeding guy and like just like survive, they both reject that. And I think in a way that's I read it as a rejection of isolationism and like as a lean towards accountability,
yeah,
and a lean towards collectivism. I think in a first look, White Alice is the collectivist option.
yeah,
But when you look at it closely, it's not, because it's so far removed and so self-dependent and self-serving that it isn't sustainable. Like, if you envision a world in which White Alice is successful, that's 8 to 10 people who are doing okay.
Yeah.
And I think this, like, where Nari is like, you don't have to kill people. I think that goes back to the line in the White Alice commandments that says the sacrifice of one is worth the continuation of the many. I think, and love your family more than yourself. I think Nari and Aurora's ride off into the sunset has a little bit to do with like a questioning of how some of those commandments look when they're expanded into the broader world.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Does that hit?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. That's kind of the general idea I got from it too. I also got maybe like it's okay to make your own path towards these things. Like perhaps knowing that Michelle Minsterling does the class on utopia dystopia, I think what is often posed in that type of literature is like, this isn't gonna work for somebody. Like, the utopia isn't always gonna work for somebody, which turns it into a dystopia, right? So kind of like you can forge your own way with what those like moral rules mean to you, basically. Like with collectivism, like, you know, I think that Rose and Nari Rose/Nari experienced that through the blooms, like the blooms taking care of each other and deciding where to go. Not to say that choice feminism is the way, but like, you know, like with a collective spirit, maybe choice feminism would be the way, but not under capitalism, you know?
I didn't expect to be thinking this much about Anthem today.
I know, but I think they're too
but it's
similar.
happening.
Yeah,
I know. The other thing that I want to bring forward as like a literary parallel is also The People Who Walked Away from Omelas by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is a story. First of all, fucking read it. It's a short story, very, very good. Sarah, have you read it? Mm-mm. Okay, so essentially the concept is that there like is a utopia where everyone is very happy, but it all depends on the fact that there is like one severely neglected child. And if that child is not neglected and locked in a cupboard and kept away from everybody else, then the utopia will crumble.
like Broken Earth vibes. N.K.
Right.
Jemisin, Broken Earth vibes.
Right. And so like basically, yes, exactly. So basically in The People Who Walked Away from Omelas, like there's a coming of age ritual where you have to go see the child. And then the title of the story is The People Who Walked Away from Omelas, because people after seeing that sometimes immediately leave, sometimes will spend years and years still in Omelas and then eventually just leave, and they all like walk out. And I think that this is like Nari and Aurora's moment of leaving Omelas. Like they are like, actually, I'm off in search of like a way that works for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think, but Aurora is leaving to go kill Damien for White Alice. But
sometimes you still gotta hit a brick, you know? Like I just like, or throw a brick rather. Like I just feel like, yeah, I mean, like, yes, she's going to go kill Damien, but like Damien is not a part of everyone when I say works for everyone.
No, that's not what I mean. I mean that she's going.
She's not leaving White Alice forever.
Yeah, she's going, but you know, who knows what could happen along the way, right? And there's the whole bit with the song at the end where she like wants that part of humanity back too. So, I think it's interesting. It's complex, and I think that might be what people didn't like in the Goodreads reviews. Like me last time when I was talking about how I didn't like that Bourne didn't have answers. This, while it's super like straightforward, also does not have answers too. The whole book is pretty straightforward, and then the end is not.
Right.
and I think that like catches people off guard.
Yeah.
But that is also something that I attribute to Ursula K. Le Guin as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I think it's interesting because I love White Alice too. It's like an intoxicating idea. That's how I feel
It's
about it.
it's the same as like being like, I'm gonna move off the grid with 10 of my closest friends. We'll each learn a vital skill,
Yeah.
and then we'll like be self-sufficient. Like, who hasn't had the compound dream? You know? Like, it's that like that exact same pull.
Yeah.
But it's
you know,
we all know why that won't go.
yes.
You know?
It's like this quote is, "We took showers together, applied lotion to each other's feet, or snuck off into the greenhouse to kiss by the flowering pear tree. We cooked together in the kitchen and blessed the boom box. We cussed, we laughed uproariously. Was this all that it takes to be happy?" We wondered. You know, you're like, I fucking want to be there.
What's
so bad.
the end of the quote? Is this all it takes to be happy? We wondered. Our work, our home, each other.
Yeah.
That's it. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, like yes, like
Yes.
that's the communist utopia that I've
Yeah.
always wanted.
But what if we got everyone on board with it so we didn't have to kill anybody
Right.
about it, you know?
Yeah.
Or you can
I
just
would love not to throw anyone in a nice hole, personally.
I think the problem is is that I agree with their killing.
They're not wrong. Right.
Like,
Yeah.
but this brings me to the question. My least favorite man of all of the men in this story end up with White Alice at the end.
Yeah.
How I don't know how to feel about that.
Okay, so to clarify, you're talking about how Grant becomes part of White Alice. He like
Yeah.
replaces Genesis.
Yes.
Grant's not gonna last a fucking week.
Right? He's gonna get murdered. Like,
Yeah. I mean, like, okay. I think that there's something for all the people who say that this book is about hating men on their face. Truly, Sterling took the least likable man and gave him a shot at redemption.
yeah.
So that's something. Like, do I personally think he's going to be capable of the growth and change that it requires to be part of White Alice? No. Do I think he's going to, like, make it very long before the women are like, you're outie? No. But I think he has his shot, and this is the shot that he's wanted, and so let him take it. When he whiffs it, he whiffs it. But, you know what I mean?
Extremely fair. Extremely fair. Okay.
Yeah.
So, something that we need to talk about is the library in this book.
My God, Jesus Christ. Okay, so I put this in here, this like fucking quote,
I also wrote this quote down.
because, okay, all right, whatever. You
Just
get
read
it.
the-
Two
read-
librarians are going to be attuned to this, but
Read the quote.
is, so Rose is like reflecting on being back in school, and she asks a teacher, what happened to the library? And the teacher says, and she's talking about the BPL. She's talking about the Boston Public Library, like the big one. And the teacher said, after the books were uploaded to the Flick, there was no use for their physical bodies. The rarest volumes were sent to the libraries at Walden, cough, cough, Harvard, and the rest were pulped to make room for the servers. Now the building is a data center, but you can still walk by and see the original building. And my question for you, Sarah, is how are we feeling about this narrative and it never fucking going away? That, like, you live in a dystopia when the library is gone.
Well, there's the historical reason for this is the burning of the Library of Alexandria. I took a history of libraries course in my master's program, and like the burning of Alexandria represented, I mean, it was a real thing that happened, but it also represented like an end of that culture as it was known at that time. Right. And like a loss of culture, a loss of knowledge, a setback. It's like burning of books and during Nazism. It's all, and like a lot of those books being like queer history, like, things like that, or it's like the loss of culture, identity, and like good things in this world.
I'll pitch that they also burned Jewish books.
Oh, it's Jewish books too. Of course. Sorry. Obviously. Obviously.
Right. And so,
Obviously,
right,
yeah.
like
I know.
not that no one doesn't know, but I just feel we should throw it in
I
there.
know. A burning of books of Jewish, queer, anything
Yes.
else that Nazism decided was not Aryan and white. Yeah, you know, all of the
So
above.
like,
I'm sure they're,
right.
yeah.
So the burning of the library as like
It's
loss of what is
humanity.
the word? Yeah, humanity or like civilization.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's like
Yeah.
a violence upon the good of humanity, I think,
Right.
is like the theme of it all.
I
Uh,
think this is yeah.
I don't
Go ahead.
listen, I don't hate it. I mean, it's like bing, bing, bing on the nose, but as a librarian, I'm like, yeah, what the fuck do you think you're going to do without the library? Yeah, the
Right.
library is an institution that must be protected, it must be upheld, and is like the one showing of like societal like good. I feel like in America especially that we have is like here's the one basically socialist institution that we have in this country. Like of course if it went away it would be bad. It's the only place where homeless people are like sometimes allowed to go.
Right.
You know, like that's where
Yes.
I get it. I get it. But the part where I get a little like reticent to like be like I full force behind it is like the equation of like library to book. That that's the spot where it's like this quote is like the books got replaced with data centers and I'm like, nah.
And therefore the library is defunct.
Yeah.
Like I think okay. So I agree with you that the equation of library to book is problematic in and of itself, right? Like the library when it is burned should be a symbol not of like knowledge burning, but rather of like community well-being
Yes.
burning and
Yes.
like goodwill for your fellow man burning.
Yes.
And so I think this missed. I think we should loop back around because I realized I never actually said things that I disliked about this book.
Oh,
I know
I'm
I gave
so
it a
sorry.
it's okay because I like forgot. I was like, oh, I don't really have anything. But this is actually so I think it's necessary for the frame of the story, and I don't deduct points of this from this. But I think for me, one of the things that like I get really tired of in dystopian fiction is like brandishing new technology as like the big scary,
Yeah.
like the big scary guy in the narrative where like the flick is because of the way the story works like the flick is actually bad technology like the more you use the flick the less you can remember about being a human person and so like in this specific case like the books being uploaded to the flick is not good because accessing them now comes at a cost to your health but I also think that like protecting libraries in some like in most situations means like embracing the technology to make them better. So the scary part of the library being gone is not that it incorporated technology, it's that it was overwhelmed by bad technology and then ceased to be a place of like communal liberation and understanding and sharing. And so like I know that the point of this book is like to talk about how like technocrats essentially are like killing the planet, which
Yeah.
is like not wrong. Like that is correct. I think like a more it just doesn't align with my and this is like not points against the book because I am an individual person, but like does not align with my own understanding of technology, which is that like it can actually be quite good.
Yeah.
And doesn't have to be horrifying. And so, right, like I think my major problem with the library narrative is that it usually is about book burning without being like about the loss of an important American institution.
Yes. I think it's the
Yeah.
space of it is it's
Yeah.
like my library we have I think like 30,000 books physical and like 250,000 digital.
Right.
If everyone had like I love physical books, but I also love ebooks. And if everyone
Mm-hmm.
had access to an e-reader, like universally, an e-reader, the ability to use it, have that be the option for them to consume books, like universally that was acceptable. And somebody was like, let's get rid of every book in the library now and change it into digital books. Like, I'm like, well, yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? You know? But I think
Right.
fit,
But you had to maintain the
but you
space.
have to maintain the
Right.
space, right? You know, and the space is still the community center, etc. But then there's things like the University of Vermont was considering getting rid of all of the books in the collection, but that is without the universal other option. And the reason why we have digital
Right.
and physical books now is that because that is the universal option, digital and
Right.
physical, because technology is helping people access the books for cheaper and more frequently, but it's also like not everyone has access to that technology or the ability
Right.
to use that technology. So access meaning ability and the ability to get it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I agree. Basically, I agree, and I also am usually like, yeah, technology bad. We get it. You know, as a literal
Right.
technology librarian, like that.
Right.
My job is to assess technology for library use and like, is it
Right.
good for my community to serve them? And that is like, that's the part of my job that's like really important. And to be like all technology bad is just not something I necessarily agree with either. The technology in this book is bad. I think the library as loss of society is a symbol that we're going to see forever.
My next question, now that we've settled the library issue, is okay, so there's this like big reveal moment where you figure out that Judith is Sal from White Alice,
Yeah.
Aurora from White Alice is Willow the Bloom, and then I think there's a secondary reveal where you figure out that the barber is Genesis from White Alice. When did you put that together? What was your aha moment like? Did you guess it before it happened?
Okay, well, you were literally at the beach with me when I had this. I was reading
Yes.
the book on the beach. Also, for context, if you haven't put it together, I mean, Teddy and I live in different cities. Teddy and I live in different cities, but we saw each other a week ago.
Yeah. And
Um,
it was fabulous.
it was great. But I was reading Camp Zero on the beach, and I was like, when White Alice goes to the mall and goes to Lake Dominion, which is where Camp Zero is, and there's like all the things aren't abandoned, and there are people, they're physically like they're buying something from somebody in the mall. That's when I realized we were on different timelines. And when I realized we were on different timelines, I was like, oh, that's kind of the moment. And we had watched Judith kill uh, the foreman. And then you're like, okay, this woman is not who she says she is. And then you get White Alice going to the mall and writing the thing on the wall of the mall and people still living there, and you're like, okay, clearly this was before the events of the other of the Rose slash Nari story. So I was like, oh, something's got up. Like White Alice is are part of the Blooms. And then Teddy was like, well, who do you think it is? I was like, maybe it's the Wee voice or Sal. And so that was my guess. And then I didn't really guess Willow, I don't think,
Mm-hmm.
or Aurora. Like, I think maybe I did, but I don't remember. And then it was the moment. So we watched the Blooms put the foreman's body into an ice hole, and then a chapter later, we watched White Alice put the body of somebody else into an ice fishing hole. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, that's it.
Okay, got it.
That's it.
Can I tell you I had a fake aha moment where I was sure that I figured it out.
Yeah.
And then I had my real aha moment later. But like I was convinced because I also figured out that we were on separate timelines, that like the White Alice stuff was happening before the Nari stuff. And so I thought that Aurora had grown up and that Aurora was Judith. Like I thought that this was like the next generation taking on the responsibility. But then, of course, Judith is Sal, and Willow is Aurora. And you only figure that out if you're paying attention to the fact that they tattoo the child with the coordinates of White Alice, and that Willow has coordinate tattoos. But yeah, this question was mostly an excuse to air my like theory that got dashed on the rocks pretty early.
Well, I was like, oh, I know what's happening. And you were like, tell me. And I was like, I'm not going to tell you until I know I'm right. Sorry.
It was awful. I just wanted to know if we were having the same thought, you know?
Okay, well, I mean, I think that covers basically all of my questions. Do you have anything that we didn't cover that you want to bring up?
Honestly, no. Just like Michelle Min Sterling. I love you.
Yeah, this is a great book, especially for a first book. I feel like
Yeah.
incredible.
Oh my god. Cannot wait to read the next one, you know?
Yeah, I know. There's going to be a next one, right? Like a next one of these books, do you think?
Oh, like a sequel?
Yeah. I don't know.
Oh.
I could go either way. I'm not always a sequel person, but
If there was a sequel, I would read it, but I think it's just so strong as a standalone that it doesn't need one.
yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, let's move on then.
All right. What are you
Well,
reading now?
Well, I am still reading my book about the troubles in Ireland because I did not bring it to my beach vacation.
Right. Classic.
I finished. Okay, so I'm kind of not really reading anything at this exact moment, but I just finished The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. I did mention this book on the Darker Shade of Magic's episode.
Yes. Yes.
Because I was like, if you want a pirate, like actual pirate, this is what this book is about. But I hadn't read it yet.
Right.
Anyway, I'm just coming back to say that I read that book, and that book fucking rocked so goddamn hard. Like, truly an amazing book. Incredible. It made me so joyous and then like stressed out. Like it's like almost 500 pages, but it's just like, oh, it's so good. And there's a literal pirate in that book named Delilah, which I did not know.
That's so funny.
It's so good. That one was amazing. I also read The Silent Patient, which fucking sucked. That was a bad book. Just like one of the most hateful books I think I've read ever. And then I am listening to the audiobook for The Secret Adversary by Agatha Christie.
How's that going?
That one's great. It is a very anti-communist book. However, it is hilarious. It features these two amateur detectives, Tommy and Tuppence, as they're trying to find some papers that may have sunk on the Lusitania. It's just a romp. The audiobook is like 7 hours. Listened to 5 hours of it yesterday in the car. It's it's great. It's great. What are you reading?
Well, I just finished Reprieve, which is that book about the haunted house, the full contact haunted house. And that was actually, it ended up being pretty good. I really liked it. And then I'm also reading Witch King by Martha Wells. Still reading it. Still reading it.
Moving on. Okay. Where did you get your book from?
From the library.
Okay. And I also got mine from the library.
Boo.
So we're moving up, right?
Yep.
So right now it was me 3 points, Teddy 2.5 points. So now it's just 4 to 3.5, right?
Yes.
Okay. Amazing. We love getting books from the library.
Oh. Okay. So, Sarah, if someone came up to you at the library and was like, man, I really loved Camp Zero by Michelle Min Sterling, what would you tell them to read next?
If they were like, I really liked Camp Zero by Michelle Min Sterling, and it's the first book I've read like this, and I really enjoyed it, I'd be like, you should read some Ursula K. Le Guin books, and specifically the books about like exploring other planets after the Earth is inhabitable. Like I forget what the overarching like world that she names for all of those books are,
Mm-hmm.
but
It's not the Hamish cycle, is it? The Hamish cycle has like dispossessed, left hand.
yeah, no, that's
Um,
that's it. That's it. That's it. Okay, so yeah, so the Hamish cycle books, by Ursula K. Le Guin, the two that I have read are the Word for World is Forest, and then the Left Hand of Darkness. The Word for World is Forest, I think, is a little bit more one to one because this book is about what happens when a utopia is threatened. So kind of like our White Alice situation, what happens when that is threatened. So in this book, there are American or like Earth Terran settlers on a world that is full of a very peaceful like indigenous people, and they are put into slavery by the Terrans, and because of that, that causes violence to occur
mm,
in their community for the first time to basically strike back against the colonizers. Whereas before there was never violence in their communities. So it's about like what you have to do in order to protect like your utopia, your peace, your community. Um, so that one was really great. It's also a very succinct book. I would say Camp Zero is. It's like very quick. Um, and then in that same is The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. So if you wanted Camp Zero to be weirder, if you could have gone for weirder, if you're just interested in like the concept of like what happens when Earth can no longer have people living in it, like that is what I would say to, or like this exploration of like further ways that communities live. Um, I think The Left Hand of Darkness fulfills that.
mm-hmm.
But Teddy, what are your thoughts?
I have so many, so I'm going to be so fast. Okay. We recommend Parable of the Sower after every book that we've read this season, but it still counts. If the flick stuff is not important to you and your favorite character in this book was the world that it was set in, you need to read Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. If your favorite character was Nari and you liked reflecting on identity during the end of the world, you should read Severance by Ling Ma. If you want more speculative fiction about the end of America trademark, like the end of America TM, if you hated Mayor and thought Grant sucked balls, then you should read American War by Omar El Akkad. Um, I promise I'm not a Margaret Atwood stan, but if you love dystopian fiction with an eye on technology, but you want the addition of biowarfare and a more intensive critique of capitalism, you're going to want to read the Mad Adam trilogy by Margaret Atwood. If you loved the White Alice girlies, this one is for you. And then the last one that I literally just added like 10 seconds ago is if you want more speculative fiction about like men and like their role in society and like what the fuck they're up to, you should read Fortress by S.A. Jones. I'm just trying to get more people to read this book because I need folks to talk about it with. This book was so weird, but was like really, really interesting, and was like a non-turfy examination of like gender and sex in society, and was like very good. And like it brought like basically it's like very compound related, like everything takes place in a very like tight amount of space, and really reminded me of Mare in a lot of points. So food for thought.
Yeah, I think the exploration of gender is definitely something for Left Hand of Darkness as well.
Oh yeah,
Would
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, I think that about wraps us up. So, in 2 weeks, we will be discussing The Witch King by Martha Wells. Teddy's really excited. Um,
Brutal.
you can find us on social media at Shelving Cart on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And new, you can also find us on YouTube and Tumblr at Shelving Cart. YouTube, we will be publishing visual episodes, and on Tumblr, we will probably be posting notes from episodes as well. So our notes, our summaries, things like that. And you can email us at shelvingcart@gmail.com for anything and everything. If you're like, I didn't like your book recommendations, or if you're like, I loved your book recommendations, or if you have questions,
You could be nice.
if you have questions, if we ever got questions in the inbox, we could go back and revisit and answer some questions from some of the books that we've read. So
Absolutely.
find us wherever you want. That's it.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
1, 2, 3, 4. Shelving cart. Shelving cart. Shelving cart. With Sarah and Teddy. Shelving cart. Shelving cart. Shelving cart. With Sarah and Teddy. Hey!
Thank you for listening to Shelving Cart. Shelving Cart was created, written, and recorded by Sarah and Teddy, edited by Sarah, and the theme music is by Kate Gardine. If you enjoyed listening to our podcast, please rate and review us on any of your podcast listening apps. We greatly appreciate it.